It's not what you assume it to be. It's what they write it down to be. So if the English law says that being punched in the face is manslaughter, then that's what it is. If you can't see what I'm getting at. So we can't assume what any of this stuff is.
This would be where the OPCA litigation in Canada, which they now use in all Commonwealth nations, is a good thing, because you cannot be in two jurisdictions at once. So when you claim that you're in two jurisdictions at once, they had no way to just squish you and get you out of the court right away. Now they do. And that's exactly what we're talking about.
That's right. They're protecting the trust. And that's what they have to do, because it's the foundation to the English law. So
so if you're doing an improper release, it's going to lead you down that path where you're going to be labeled OPCA litigation, which is, again, to protect basically yourself.
Exactly.
And you would do an improper release by not supporting your release properly, right?
Well, that's correct, because everybody, like majority of people, they believe that the common law is where they're gonna is their remedy if they claim it, but they're claiming it as their remedy instead of as their warranty. So everybody's claiming that they're bound by the common law, but they're not bound by the common law. The government and everybody in fee simple are bound by the common law for the warranty attached to your trust. That's what we need to really get people to understand, is why, and that's why those three things have to be dealt with in everything that we do. So if we look at what the actual English law says about municipal law, if you're incorporated into it, you're barred from release and everything else. So that's saying if you're holding things, right? Because in order to be incorporated into the municipal law, you actually have to be holding lands, right? Or on the lands as that capacity.
Have an interest in that, correct?
That's right. You have to have an interest in it. So, and then when we look even farther, there's how to get at this. There's certain restrictions that everybody, and that word is important, everybody in that jurisdiction. So when you're reading an area of law, like let's say you're reading an act, let's say it says the Real Property Act. It says everyone. Well, in order to find out what they mean by everyone, we have to go to the source of that Real Property Act, the act that gave it its life. So we have to go to the Law of Property of 1925. And we'll notice that it's pretty much, even the United States made a new one right out in 1925 and everything, because everybody had to do it. Everybody that was a part of the municipal corporations had to start creating their own law for their own jurisdictions. And that's when you read everybody, it's saying everybody because it's assuming that you understand what law and jurisdiction is, and if that law applies to you or not, by following the Seton law, right? Where do you live and what do you do for a living? See what I'm getting at? So when we look at all these things and how they all come back into place and what they're all determining, they're basically determining what your actions are and who you're doing them for. And it's always over a thing, right? Because if we look at all English law, especially the foundation, it all starts over a thing, not over you. It has nothing to do with an actual individual. It only starts to begin to do with an individual once they've entered into that jurisdiction of a use, right? Being a trustee. And then that's why it transfers to the individual, right? Because now you can transfer to one to the next, and that those rights and duties transfer with it, right? See what I'm getting at? When you buy a car, right, you have to go and insure it and everything else and do all these things just like everybody else does, right? But that's just because you're in the same jurisdiction as them. So it's important to understand how these things are all laid out and the basic fundamentals of it. And we don't actually get those answers until we actually start going to the very source. So for the start of this municipal corporations and trading companies and stuff, we got to go to 1535, the statute of uses. And that's where all this starts. And it's important to keep everything in a chronological form because jurisdictions change by the year. I don't mean as in every single year, but in 1535 was a major jurisdiction change and people never noticed it. Only the elected or the so-called elected and appointed officials of English law, it changed for them, but the people underneath it didn't realize anything. And then you would notice that then the government starts making new laws that are based on that authority that was granted, right, by that statute of use. And then we trace it from 1535 on. You get all your answers on how these different levels have been done. So in Littleton's time, before the statute of uses, release was done in a different fashion because we have to remember that A is you as donor, right? B is the donee, right? The donee created government, which is C, right? And you as the citizen are D, right? So this happened after 1535. That was the new change, was they added in the C, right? So after 1530, your release is changed. The release has there's been a new form of release added because releases work in twofold as well. When we're talking about before the equity, you as the donor swore allegiance to the monarchy. And then you went and worked for yourself or whatever. You didn't have to become a corporate person. You didn't join a corporation. They didn't exist. So as you can see, before this municipal equity jurisdiction came into place, there was no C. So there was no return from the sea, right? It's funny that C is actually C because they even name the jurisdictions C, SEE, and SEA, right? And it gets even when we start putting all this down in chronological form and putting everything where it needs to be in a proper picture, it gets to be very powerful. So the releases, so back before the equitable jurisdiction of 1535, the release was the donee releasing to you, right, or the Lord Manor releasing to you through the authority of the donee through the courts, right? So releases works both ways. You can release, right? They have to release, right? Because they have rights and duties to you that they're releasing as well, right? And then you're going to read about confirmation. When confirmation is also twofold, because confirmation happens when you give, like in this current equity scheme with municipal corporations, when you give your when you give your notice of release, recognized and justifiable release to the government, they have to give you a release and confirmation in return. See what I'm getting at? But it also, and then same with the judges. So that confirmation, it comes in when you've actually got that deed under seal, is stopping them from disputing it ever again. So that's basically your charter, right? Your law with them stating that they can't do these things anymore, or, right, or whatever. So all these things, when you're reading about them, they're going to be writing about all the different capacities, whether it's the judge releasing, right, in the monarchy's capacity, right, with confirmation, or you releasing with confirmation as fee simple for something, or because there's so many different levels and different situations each individual could be in. They have to discuss all of them to give you that understanding. So it'll only be a paragraph, right? Sometimes it'll be a little bit more, but it'll just be a tiny little section, and it'll be filled with footnotes. And when it comes to what situation you've fallen into, you got to read that section, take those footnotes, and follow those footnotes. You don't follow everything out of the whole thing. You can. You'd get a great amount of knowledge if you did that, if you followed them all and things like that. You get a real understanding on how to locate this stuff and everything much easier. But you'll notice that the corporate person and them barring you from the trust didn't actually happen until after 1535 and 1666. So this level right now, where the courts play ignorant and everything else, like in the equity courts, and even you standing in front of the Queen's courts without a deed of release, the judge is going to be ignorant. You're going to have to force it down their throat, because they're doing everything it seems like they're doing everything they can to stop people from succeeding at this. So that's why it's important.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When I think I'm seeing a pattern here that when you say, like, you give them notices, or like, for instance, a notice of release, and that's, I think, what they call an offer. So you're offering some information to them or whatever. If they accept that information, so offer and acceptance, if they accept it, that would be a confirmation that it's been accepted. Is that correct? No.
What makes you think that this is an offer instead of what they have to do in a demand?
That's a good point. But I'm saying that, when we go in there and you offer something, they have the right to accept it or not accept it. So
replace offer with receipt.
Receipt. Okay. So we give them a receipt. So a receipt of a deed, or the deed.
No. Of your land. The land that you donated away.
You've already got the law. So what I'm trying to point out is that's why it's important to always keep those three levels that you have to prove, right? Your right to do it, the right over the thing, and the right that they have to do it, right? That the opponent has to do it. And when we look at it in that form, right? Like, I know we're at release now, but if we look at the actual warranty that's attached, this isn't a question. This isn't us asking. They don't have a choice. Otherwise, it's slavery. They're usurping your trust, and it's breaching the entire foundation of the common law. So
Justice is correct, and he's saying it's not an offer; it's a receipt or proof of something to show them that they have to do it, because this thing has already been done before, whether it's a law or whatever else you're showing.
Their deed poll, but your indenture.
Exactly.
Their deed. So their duty by the deed poll and your indenture or contract with the right to do it.
Yeah, your absolute warranty.
This is how you get to your superior title.
So that's why I was saying the things that we're going to be touching on the basic point of this release. When we get to the other steps, we're going to be adding even more, Because once we get to the writ of entry and what fee simple absolute really is, and the warranties and everything annexed to it in law, and the monarchy law to support that is staggering, and it's just going to add more for this part, if that makes sense. So the biggest thing to remember that if they don't have to do that thing, then isn't it slavery? Like, we really have to start getting this point of fact down, that if you don't have the choice and they can ignore it and piss it away or whatever, that we might as well have nothing.
That's where the injury comes in and the deforcement.
That's right. And that's why the law is created the way it is, and that's why we have the writs that we have, and that's why the history in the history to these writs and court processes and the law that was formed around it was formed because we have people in control that have always been in control, and they're not letting go. And until the people start pulling their head out of their ass and start using the courts and the law and learning the law that these criminals are using, because everybody wants to run from the people's courts. Well, they're using the equitable courts. When people realize that they actually have no jurisdiction and authority, and the only reason why they do is because everybody's being ignorant of what their own realities are, it's all going to change.
Well, to me, that's why it seems so important that the notices. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut.
No, that's okay. I can't read in the side room and chat at the same time. So if anybody just butt in, it would be better than.
I do have a question, if I don't mind. It's on the back of what Tonka's been saying. It's with regards to the release and when we're handing our notices in, and the jurisdiction we're going to kind of hand them in at. Is it, if for example Tonka is from Quebec but lives in Ontario, resides in Ontario, works in Ontario, are we okay to vest or hand our notices in to that jurisdiction that he's currently residing in, or is it best for him to vest them at his birthplace in Quebec, for example?
Okay, well, that's actually two questions. Because if we always keep what is law and jurisdiction and those three levels always in mind, it'll tell us who all we have to claim against and where we have to do it. So we can see that the deed of release doesn't really matter what jurisdiction you do it in. It's the lands that matter, because that's the determining factors. You want the lands. The government, your home jurisdiction, or the ones that are claiming that to be your home jurisdiction, they can't force you to be that person, and you should already have the law that stops them from even disputing it. So let's say that you wanted to stay in Ontario and you wanted to pick lands in Ontario. So your claim would include the people that are in Ontario, right? The Attorney General of Ontario, right, for the province, and the seal holder, which would be the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. And then you would also be the Attorney General of Quebec and and the Lieutenant Governor of Quebec, because that's who signed your deed poll, right? Your indenture, right? Well, their deed poll, your indenture. So you would attach them as well, and you would just use that extra, because you got to remember that now by adding somebody out of province, it extends the time that they have to reply to your claim. So instead of them having 20 days, now it'll be 40 days or something, right? So you'd have both the governments, right, to deal with the deed of release, plus also because the Ontario ones are the ones that are actually holding the lands for there. So they're the Fofaies, right? See what I'm getting at? And then you also got whoever decises you, right? So you got to remember that you've got to deal with who's on your deed, who's on your indenture, right? So you're going to name whoever's on your indenture, right? Whatever jurisdiction that you're in for the lands that you're claiming, because we're talking about lands, right? Because the indenture is going to be linked to your corporate person, right? So it's also linked to the land. So it's also a part of the land. So whatever province or state, that's who you're going to claim against as well, right? And also the decisor, who has those lands in fee simple. So it's always going to be those same things for everybody, no matter what jurisdiction you're in. Because the documents and their jurisdictions, remember, state exactly what jurisdiction and what law they're bound by. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
I guess what I don't quite get on there is when I was talking to Tonka before, we looked up the Quebec, and how to dissolve the person, the corporate person, and I know it's not exactly the same.
I need to ask you a question. What were you looking at to dissolve the corporate person?
Oh, you mean the document?
Where were you looking?
Oh, it was for you guys in Canada. I'm not familiar with that because I'm from in California, but it was the Registrar General.
Okay, well that's what I'm saying. So that's equity. What equity doesn't have the right to do anything except for transfer your citizenship to another municipal corporation.
Right, but you had said that the indenture was about the corporate person.
Yes, but the indenture is common law. It has nothing to do with equity. That's why That's why when anybody goes and you see videos on YouTube of people walking in there with
let me stop you, William, because you did mention that it was an indenture to the corporate person there, and I was going to chime in. It's not an indenture to the corporate person. It's a deed poll for that corporate person because they're using your indenture. It's an indenture just to get to your donor capacity, get your land back to you. The rest, if you're going to go and get to that corporate person, then I guess you could technically say it's an indenture to the corporate person because now you're using it. But you're punching yourself in the face, which isn't an injury.
So, and when we're talking the indenture, we're talking about the warranty or the certificate of live birth.
That's right, the long form that your parents signed.
Yeah, correct.
So that's not corporate. Because that's a real.
That's an indenture to the one that's not acting as the corporate person.
Right.
That document creates the corporate person. The birth certificate, the one that nobody signs but the government, right? That's the corporate person. That's what creates that. That's the acceptance to the contract. The contract is the live registration of birth. The acceptance is the birth certificate.
Yeah, see, like in California here, they use those as both. That's why it's so confusing. Like the certificate of live birth, they just take that and they copy it right onto a corporate document to make a birth certificate out of it.
Yeah, so you're still acting in a capacity as the use, though, so that's the catch. See, just like you can be walking around with your live record of birth and you're still a fee simple. You have to remit it. Not until you're not holding one and you've returned it and got its warranty attached to it, are you no longer that person.
Wait, you said return it and get its warranty that's attached to it. I don't quite understand that. I'm missing something, I guess. You said you return it And you get
It's a
your
remit.
warrant that's attached to it.
You remit the live registration of birth. It's a receipt. It's your deed to your trust.
Right. So you show that, you remit it, or you actually turn it over, and then they give you a different thing called back.
You
Or
give that back, and they exempt you for everything. That's what the writ of entry is for, and the writ of waste to follow.
Right.
That's the writ of entry is where you remit your live registration of birth.
Okay.
Because that's them splitting. That's the two titles.
Right. I just thought the writs they come after the notices though.
Oh, the writs come in the court.
Come in the court.
That's it. The only thing that you're ever going to send any of these, the government or the fee simple, is a notice, and that's it. Everything else is done in court.
Yeah, the writs are issued by the court. Issued by the court.
Okay.
You just put the demand in. You're putting a demand in the name of the sovereign, the trustee.
Right. Because I had technically submitted my certificate of live birth in, and they gave me a receipt that they had it, but nothing got done after that.
But yeah, they had to send you something saying that, yeah, we got it. Yeah. But you didn't give them any instruction or anything either.
Yeah.
But then you'll notice that if you did give them instruction, you'll end up getting to talk to somebody, and then they're gonna play around about something else, right? So everything that I've found, it's gonna have to go to the courts, because the Queen's courts are the only ones that actually have the authority to do anything about it anyway. The government can't even give you the trust. They don't have that right in law.
Yeah, you said they can only transfer it, but it back in there's another.
No. As soon as you get, that's the reason for the notice, because they're bound by law that once they give notice to do that thing, right? And by them not doing that thing is the injury, because as soon as you give the government the notice, they're supposed to make a court date and get that deed of release transferred to you, just like when you give notice for your lands to the fee simple that's holding you out of your ownership and possession and fee, right? They're supposed to make a court case to transfer it to you, because they only have a use of that thing for a fee. So they got to go to the boss, which is the Queen, right, to get it transferred. The Queen's too busy to deal with all these people, so she got people to take on that duty for her. And
this is why you want to know the seat of law, the 3 levels, and the jurisdiction that you're claiming your land in. Because if you don't know those things, they're going to throw you as an OPCA litigant.
That's right. So that's why it's important, before we even get into the stuff about the writs and everything, to make sure that that you guys really have the information, so you get the understanding on what these different jurisdictions are, and to make sure you're only in one at all times. Because as soon as you become 2 capacities in 2 different jurisdictions at the same moment, your case is done, like immediately. And as we know by what we've been reading in law and everything else, they're going to use everything that they can to toss it out. You see what I'm getting at? Because it's just going to keep making them more money and forcing you to spend more money and more time, getting you more angry and everything else, and giving it more time for you to have conflicts on the side of the road with police and other things, right?
And they use that OPCA litigation against anybody now. I've got a case file where they've used it in the U.S. So if you're trying to claim you're in two jurisdictions or another jurisdiction than the one that they've got you in per your domicile, then you're in trouble.
And that's why we have to deal with this release of corporate person and truly understand what these actually mean and how we got here in order to get any farther. Because it's very dangerous.
So the affidavit of your corporate release, you want to basically do and send off at the same time as your notices for going and claiming your land in reversion interest. You want to kind of hit them all at once, because if you stagger it and you, like, say you've got any equitable contract standing, you're going to latch yourself to that corporate ID. And that's going to cause you trouble when you actually do realize that you got to go to the court, you got to get that deed release, you got to vest it that way. It's going to cause yourself harm.